I just so appreciate the chance to come and speak with you this morning and share with you some things that we don't talk about a whole lot regarding abortion. First of all, I just have to say, because I know that you're all really worried about me if you saw my little finger thing. I had a freak accident Friday night after going to a pregnancy center gala in Colorado Springs. I reached down to pick something up off the floor, and I kind of lost my balance, and I jammed my finger on the floor, and it just bent. I couldn't straighten it anymore, and I didn't know what was wrong. And the reason I'm smiling and laughing is because it was just such a bizarre injury. All of a sudden I had this floppy finger, and I discovered that it's a tendon that was torn. So anyway, I figured nobody's ever going to take me seriously again with a crooked finger, but so I just want to talk about the very difficult subject of abortion. And I'm going to start with my story, and that is, well, first let me back up. A lot of people nowadays have sustained some sort of trauma from their childhood, childhood abuse that has affected them their entire life. Not me. I lived a rather charmed life. I grew up in a wonderful, very healthy home, and so any problems that I have in my life, you could say I'm a do-it-yourselfer. So I was born in Guatemala when my parents were living down there as missionaries, and so I grew up in a very different environment than a lot of us did. We came back to the United States in 1970, so we pretty much missed the whole decade of the 60s. And my parents, didn't have any clue what all happened, how much the culture changed during that time. I grew up knowing right from wrong. I was brought up in a very strong Christian home, and I knew the Bible better than most people because my parents were Bible translators in Guatemala. My life goal was to become a wife and a mother because my parents had demonstrated that so well to me. Everything was going along fine until I graduated from high school. Over in Papua New Guinea, actually. And we stopped in New Zealand for a little vacation on our way home to the United States. And I just happened to be at the wrong place with the wrong person. There was a guy I had met in Australia several months before. He was a college-age guy, and I was not yet even 18. When we were in New Zealand, and this guy had heard that I was going to be in New Zealand, and so he followed me over there. Well, actually, he was waiting there for me. Well, my parents didn't want me to go out with him. They knew better. But I begged and begged. Oh, we just want to go shopping. So they let me go out shopping with him for the day. And at the end of the day, he said, I need to pick up something at my apartment. And so we stopped by his apartment. And what happened there was what we call today date rape. But we didn't have that terminology back then in 1979. And I was so shocked and humiliated and all the horrible words you could think of. But my parents didn't want me to have gone out with him, this guy, and so I couldn't tell them what happened. I couldn't prove them right. I blamed myself for what happened. And I kept that a secret from that day on for decades. Perhaps I'm not so much of a do-it-yourselfer, because you bury these memories and you tell yourself you're okay, but that had a bigger effect on me, I believe, than I realized until even the last couple of years. So in my safe, loving environment that I grew up in, with no abuse, I never even heard of any kind of serious abuse as a child. All the adults in my life were trustworthy up to that point. And my parents were pretty naive about the protection they needed to give me as I was growing up, and my sisters, because like I said, things really changed in the United States in that decade that we were in Guatemala. And because they didn't know how to protect us, and we thought everybody's trustworthy, it just all played into making some bad choices. And because my ideal of not having sex until marriage was pretty much blown, I think in my subconscious I believed, well, it doesn't matter anymore. So I made some poor choices. And just 8 months out of high school, I found out that I was pregnant. And I thought that I could go to my church and they would help me with this, because I'd grown up in the church and it seemed like a safe place. So I met with a woman there who spent 45 minutes with me telling me how wrong and guilty I was and how I needed to change my lifestyle. Well, duh, I knew that better than anybody. What I needed was solutions. I needed help. And the only solution that was talked about was, in a negative sense, you can't have an abortion because that's murder. But I was given no resources, I was given no support, and I left that day feeling like the scum of the earth and determined not to tell another Christian what I was going through. And I went from there to Planned Parenthood. And you probably know how the story ends, going to Planned Parenthood. I truly thought that they would help me plan to be a parent.
Imagine that.
Yeah. So it was kind of shocking to me because I didn't want an abortion. I didn't know anything about abortion. I didn't know anything about prenatal development. I had never gotten any information on either of those things. But it took Planned Parenthood about 5 to 10 minutes to sell me on an abortion because it was a solution. And they told me, it's just a piece of tissue and you can go on with your life. And I wanted to believe them, so I went through with it. Well, I had my abortion. I woke up throwing up, knowing I'd done the worst thing that anybody could do. And it really didn't matter what I did now. And so my life just spiraled downhill from there. And I found myself pregnant again. Surprise, surprise, even with birth control. Only this time I knew to skip the church because who needs that kind of grief? And I went directly to the clinic and had my second abortion 9 months after the first. And again, I couldn't tell anybody about this, so I just put a smile on my face and pretended everything was fine. Looking back, I remember, and even now, mostly the church is silent about abortion. Or if they talk about it, they talk about, the tragedy of all the babies that have died. But I was thinking back the other day, why didn't the church ever talk about this? Why was the church so silent all along? And you know, when it happened, wasn't everybody really upset when Roe v. Wade passed? But actually, I think it slid in under most of our radar, most of the adults' radar, most of the church's radar. Perhaps the Catholic Church was more aware than the Protestant Church. But Nixon was sworn into office just 2 days before Roe v. Wade passed. And the day after he was sworn into office, he signed the peace declaration to end the Vietnam War. And so all of our attention was on our new president and the ending of the war. And we didn't realize the real war that would begin that day. I didn't realize when I had my abortions, when my children were ripped from my womb, I didn't realize the implications in my life, the effects that it would have. All I saw was a solution. The only place that gave me a solution was Planned Parenthood, unfortunately. I didn't know how my self-worth would plummet, how there would be nothing left of it. When I look back, the church gave me two choices. One, have this baby without our support and with our condemnation.
Wow.
Or two, oh wait, they didn't give me another choice. And so I felt like I didn't have any other choice. When somebody offered me one, as horrible as it was, that's what I took. I didn't know, and I just backing up, the lady at church I spoke with, she didn't have any training. She thought she was doing a good thing with me. But I didn't know all the other poor choices I would make because of that. I made a bad marriage choice, 2 of them. I had 2 failed marriages. I felt like I didn't deserve better. And besides that, I was a missionary kid, and I thought I could fix him. When I became pregnant on purpose, and I started studying fetal development for the first time, the reality of what I'd done to my first children, my first 2 children, came to me, and I was devastated. I didn't know when I had my abortions that while I was still pregnant with my son, that I would receive information on abortion procedures with pictures. And I just wanted to kill myself. But I couldn't do that. If I did that, I'd be killing yet another baby, so I was trapped. And if I couldn't go to my church about my pregnancy, I certainly couldn't go to my church about my abortions. And then after my son was born, nobody warned me about the nightmares I would experience of losing my son night after night because of my guilt. Nobody warned me about this other thing that happened. I would hear my son crying, my infant son, and I'm going to go to a couple pictures of him. His name's Micah. I would hear him crying, so I'd go check on him. But he wasn't crying, so I'd go back to bed. And then I'd hear crying again, and I'd go check on him. And he wasn't crying, and I'd go back to bed. It happened over and over again. Of course, sometimes he was crying because that's what babies do, but he was a very happy baby. And I learned later that what I was experiencing was audible hallucinations because of my guilt. And I had no place to go with this. I put a smile on my face every day, and everybody thought I was doing great. Nobody had any idea. But every time I heard my son cry for real, it just sent me into a rage because it just reminded me of all those nightmares that I went through. And so I was unable to bond with my son. How can you bond with someone you lose every night in your nightmares? But what do you do with all of this? Thank God for the upbringing that I had. I had a great parents who taught me how to raise children, how to care for them. So I went through all the motions. And I think I did a pretty good job because none of my friends had any idea what was going on inside me. But as time went on, there was something very evident to me, and that was the big difference between the before abortion Joni and the after abortion Joni. There was such a big difference because I didn't have any childhood trauma to muddy up the waters. I knew what was causing my problems. And I'm so thankful that God brought me to a place where I found a Bible study that helped women heal from abortion. And I went through that with several other women, and it dealt with not just the sin part. That's what everybody talks about, the sin part, you murdered your baby. It helped us deal with that and be able to receive forgiveness from God. But it also helped us learn how to grieve the loss. Because I didn't just have 2 abortions, 2 surgeries. It wasn't like having my gallbladder removed. I lost my children. And I needed to grieve the loss. I didn't know I had permission to do that. But I needed to recognize that they were people. And I was able to name them, and I named my first baby Hope, because I finally had hope that I didn't have to kill myself. And I named my second baby Grace, because I found there was no hope without the grace of God in my life. So I began a healing journey that is really a lifetime journey, because until I'm reunited with my children in heaven, I will never be fully healed. When my daughter Danielle came along, I was a much different mother. I couldn't wait for her to wake up. I was excited to be a mom because of the healing I'd been through. I didn't have the rage in me anymore. I was able to bond with my son. We focus on the loss of the babies collectively when we talk about abortion. But we need to start talking about the collateral damage. The damage not only to women, to the moms, to the dads, to the grandparents, to the siblings, to all of us, because all of our lives are devalued because of abortion. The judgment of the church didn't save my babies or me. The judgment of the Republican Party didn't save my babies or me. Pro-life legislation didn't save my son from the verbal abuse and the rough handling because of what a mess I was. Over the long term, my life was messed up in so many ways. But again, I kept my smile. Everything's good. And it wasn't until I started going through that healing process that I could get real and really weep and grieve and accept God's forgiveness. Imagine my son and daughter, those beautiful children, the abuse they would have endured had I not been through healing. I would have never bonded with either of them. They would have come from an abusive home. And that's another part of collateral damage that we don't talk about. We don't recognize. Child abuse has risen greatly over the decades. And how much has abortion played into that? How many moms and dads feel and felt like I do, or I did? There was an exception in my case. My kids didn't have to come from an abusive home because after I went through healing, I recognized what a bad example I'd been, especially to my son. My daughter was still an infant. at the time. And one day he was playing on the floor. He was about 3.5. And he was playing on the floor, and I knelt down next to him and I said, Micah, Mommy has been so angry so much, and sometimes at you. And I want you to know that it's not your fault. It's Mommy. I've had some things that I've been dealing with, and I just want you to know that I love you, and I ask your forgiveness for me treating you this way. And Micah reached his arms out and stood up and said, I forgive you, Mommy. And I believe in that exchange right there, that the healing happened in his heart. That to this day, he doesn't remember. And he's got a great memory. This boy started talking before he was 1. And he's got a great memory. He doesn't remember me being that angry mom, because that's what forgiveness does. There are 2 resources, and I meant to, do you want to grab the complication and the hush video is down there. There's a couple of resources that have come out for, they talk about the damage to women. And I don't know if you are familiar with them. There's a film that came out, I think in 2015 or 2016, Hush, that talks about, it's a documentary on the damage that abortion does to women, including breast cancer and early term births, that costing our nation billions of dollars. There's another book, or a book, called Complications, Abortion's Impact on Women, that is also, it's an incredible book that goes into all the societal effects, the psychological effects, the physical effects, the spiritual effects. And neither of these are done from a religious perspective. They're done from a purely scientific perspective, based on over 650 worldwide studies. So I have a couple of these if you're interested, and they're greatly marked down, because there is a newer version, but this version still has more information than you could ever imagine. We need to talk about the damage of abortion to men. You know, that's probably might be hard for you to read. But the damage to dads, it hasn't been researched as much, but the research shows all of these things. They're more likely to deny their grief. When grief is expressed, they're more likely to be angry and aggressive and be in control. Relentless emptiness, risk-taking behaviors, obsessive thoughts about the child, desire for another child, and behavior to achieve that goal. They also have suicidal ideation and behavior. Inability to sort out their feelings, emotional abuse, and or spousal battering is common. So you wonder where all this abuse is coming from. Abortion has a lot to do with that. Addictions, they also have nightmares, struggles with relationships. They have a hard time connecting. They have a hard time committing, just like women can have that effect. Sense of lost manhood. I mean, when you've played a part in taking the life of your own children, what kind of man are you? And that plays into your thinking. And then we need to think about the damage to youth. Millennials are the first generation to be completely optional. Think about that. If you grew up and you knew in your subconscious, I'm completely optional. Suicide is the second leading cause of death in people ages 15 to 24. So that includes our Gen Zers. Our Gen Zers are anybody from birth to 18 nowadays. They have no hope. They can't trust anybody. And why? Because they were raised by parents who were raised by people like me who were never healed from abortion and all kinds of other trauma that goes along with that. So if we focus solely on the loss of the babies, which it's a lot easier to do, we're going to miss the collateral damage, the damage that's done to all of us. And I don't have time to go into the effect on siblings and grandparents and friends, on the culture at large, on the church. So we need to talk about what can we do about that. If we focus just on the politics, I think that's where, if you believe in God, you believe in the devil, and that's where the devil wants us to completely focus on. Because it's a lot easier fighting for an ideology or fighting for public policy that will bring about better results in the future. But we need to talk about the human element of this all. And I often hear people say, you need to take action. As I said, we're going to miss the collateral damage, but knowledge empowers. That book and video I talked about, it's important we learn about these things and understand what's going on with people like me, who have never had a chance to be healed. But we need to educate ourselves. You can speak to the young people in your life. You can speak to the parents. How many times do parents pressure or force their daughters or their son's girlfriend to have an abortion to cover up, to keep the family from experiencing shame? Parents need to be educated in these things. And pastors, if you're a Christian and you go to church, your pastor needs to hear from you. It's not that we want pastors to preach against abortion. I think that's what they're afraid of, that we're going to say, you need to speak against, you need to preach out against how terrible abortion is and all the babies that are killed. No, what they need to do is just address it proactively with the youth. Give them the information. I don't believe young people of today know much more about abortion than I did back in 1980. And we need to start educating them about the truth about it. And we need to speak about it graciously for people who have been through that, who were deceived like I was, and who just need grace. And they need to be directed to healing. Because when you go through something that traumatic, you stuff it inside and you tell yourself you're okay, because you have to be okay if you're going to go on living. You either kill yourself or you have to be okay. And after doing that for years, for even decades, you convince yourself, I'm okay, but there's all these other things in your life that are not okay. Most of you in the room are men. And you're told so often, you don't have a right to say anything against abortion. You're a man. Well, all of this collateral damage removes us from the stupid my body, my choice argument, or any of those other arguments, because there's so much more at stake than my body, my choice, which it isn't, of course, just my body. It's a baby. You are empowered to talk about the collateral damage, because it affects you, it affects your children, it affects your grandchildren and your great-grandchildren and the generations to come. And the way we're going to turn this around is talking about the collateral damage, not just about the loss of the babies. Because you can't save the baby unless you save the mama first, right? And sometimes the daddy, and sometimes the grandparents. So we've got to talk about all of that because it affects all of us. So taking action, one of the things you can do if you go to church is become a Hope and Grace ambassador. We have a program called Operation Equip, which I have some brochures over here about this, where we equip the church, we equip pastors, we equip people like you in churches to have constructive conversations about abortion that will change the tide, that will make a difference in young women's lives. You can bring hope to not only your congregation, but your community. If you're not a part of a church, you can bring hope. Bringing this subject up, taking the fear out of this subject, and becoming a safe place to run. Because I didn't have a safe place to run, and I don't believe that most women today who are experiencing an untimely pregnancy have a safe place to run. Yes, there are pregnancy centers, but that's not enough. We need to become safe as people and let the young women and young men around us know we're safe to come to. Who has the majority of abortions in America? Does anybody know?
Was it Roman Catholics? Is that true? African Americans? Oh.
Well, actually, it's women who identify as Christians. Women who identify with the Christian faith. Protestants a little more than Catholics.
Oh, okay.
But there's two studies that were done. One was done by a Christian organization that found that nearly 70% of the women they surveyed were Christians, and many of them were going to church at the time of their first abortion. Another study that was done on 8,000 women at the time of their abortions in 2014, I believe it was, showed that 54% of those women at the time of their abortions identified as Christians. So when we're fighting this out there in the world and we're fighting with politics, we're ignoring that Christianity is providing the abortion providers with most of their clients. And so we can't ignore that. We need to think about how do we address this in a way that we can start turning that around. It's because Christians treat pregnancy outside of marriage as a sin, don't we? So often. But pregnancy isn't a sin. It never is a sin. It might be the consequence of a sin, but it's always a consequence with a blessing. And so we need to look at it differently and let our young people know that too, and show them grace when they end up in that situation. What we do with, let's talk about what changing laws doesn't do. Changing laws doesn't change hearts, it doesn't help women in crisis, and it doesn't bring hope and grace. It does a lot of good things. If abortion had been illegal back in 1980, perhaps I wouldn't have sought it out. It wouldn't have been as easy. But it didn't matter. It didn't change my heart. It didn't help me. And any laws, any legislation that was in place, it didn't bring me the hope that I needed. Operation Equip is, as I mentioned, what we have put in place to equip the church so that the church may become empowered by truth, healed by grace, champions for life, and a safe place to run. Because wouldn't it be refreshing if the church was a safe place to run? Maybe more of us would be interested in being a part of that if that were the case. I'm going to end with a question. Do the young women in your church, in your community, in your circle of influence know a safe place to run if they end up with an untimely pregnancy? If not, what are you going to do about it? Because if you say you're against abortion and you keep your mouth closed about the damage this does to people's lives, it doesn't mean anything if they don't know a safe place to run. I have written a couple of books, which I guess I can walk over there because I'm not on a string here. And I have some copies here, and they're available on a donation basis. Why can't we say the A word in church? Overcoming Our Dirtiest Secret with Hope and Grace. It's actually a how-to talk about abortion from the pulpit and in the church in a way that is life-changing. And then Memoirs of a Christian Who Chose Abortion, which is my story. My story is also in this book, the A-word book, not in quite as much detail, interspersed, where it's talking about the different subjects, the different aspects of abortion. But I encourage you to read these. Pick one of these up and give it to some young women and young men in your life that it could make a difference. Because it leads them to the truth. It talks about the reality of abortion. One of the things we're doing too, and I would love it, even if there's one person in here that can take this message back to your pastor in your church. Your pastor's not going to give me the time of day because he doesn't know me, but he knows you. And you can introduce him to this, and you can introduce him to me. But we're starting a safe church program where a church can, if they go through certain steps and do certain things and learn certain things, they can be certified as a safe church. And then they can go on a registry of a safe place to run for people who need that. So, thank you again for allowing me to come and talk to you. I hope that I gave you something maybe you hadn't heard yet and something to think about and chew on. And let's just keep asking that question. Do the young women around us know a safe place to run if they get in a difficult situation with a pregnancy?
You would take some questions?
Yes.
One comment here. You said that most of the women who have abortions identify as Christians. Well, aren't most of the women in the United States Christians?
No. And I think it's really interesting because there's a lot of different religions, and you can look on Guttmacher Institute and see the breakdown of the different religions or, different segments of people. And somebody said black people, that's because a higher percentage of blacks have abortions than any other race. But the first study I mentioned that was done by a Christian organization, Lifeway Research, they interviewed women who had had abortions, over the decades. And that's why I believe that their percentage of women who identified with the Christian faith who had abortions was so high, almost 70%, because Christianity used to be a much bigger thing. There used to be a lot more higher percentage of the population that identified as Christians than they do now. And so the more recent study that was done in 2014 just surveyed people at the time of their abortions that year, and I believe that's why it was lower, because less people nowadays, a lower percentage, even identify with the Christian faith, period. I don't know if that answers your question.
Kind of, yeah. Somebody else?
Yeah, you said a safe place to run. Is there a list somewhere, like a website of safe places? You said that you get a safe certificate or something. Is there some website? And like, I live in Lakewood, so I have no clue if there's any. And how do you define a safe place to run?
Okay, those are great questions. First of all, no, there's not a registry yet. We are just starting this. and we need help getting churches on that list. It goes back to how you become that way is we have a list of different things you can do, a church can do under each of these objectives to be empowered by truth. You know, it's educating your youth on what abortion is, educating your youth and your whole congregation on the damage that abortion does. Helping people have compassion instead of anger towards those who have had abortions, because we always think it's somebody out there that did that, but often it's somebody that's sitting right near us. Helping women and men and grandparents heal from abortion, how abortion has affected their lives. If a church is doing that, they're not going to be pointing the fingers. They're going to be showing grace toward people and really being champions for life. Not, you should have known better, and having that kind of attitude toward these girls. Letting them know if you do the first 3 things on the list, if you accomplish that, you're going to be a safe place to run. So we have some specific things for churches to do, and then they, when they accomplish a certain number of them, then they can be certified as a safe church. Did I answer everything you said?
Well, there's no place that, I live in Lakewood, there's no place that I can go to know if there's a safe place to run.
Right, and that's why we need to start this. That's why we need to start this
Do
registry.
you have like a little business card where you could just put down a list of safe places? That would be, I think would be the best thing.
Yeah, we need to start. We need to start, and you can start with pregnancy centers. They're a safe place to run.
Since Joni came all the way from the Springs, we're going to pass the bucket to give her a little gas money and support what she's doing.
Thank you. And also,
And Ray had a question.
okay, let me just, before you ask that question, if you want to give a donation, that would be awesome. If you want to get something for your donation, just come up to the table and there's that. We can take credit cards or cash or checks.
A choice.
Okay, go ahead.
In answer to the Ray Warren Lakewood, in answer to the question about where you can go to Lakewood, the answer is the Archdiocese of Denver, the Catholic ministry, has a project called Gabriel Project. And that project is one that offers counseling, refuge, supplies, and so forth to women who are in troubled pregnancies or are thinking about abortion. In fact, Our Lady of Fatima Parish, where I go, has a Gabriel House. It used to be a convent, and now is a Gabriel House, which is staffed by volunteers who help and offer counseling and so forth to women who might request it.
Cool.
That's awesome. And I'd love for you to get in touch with me. I have some business cards. I don't put them out there. But I do have some, and I have other literature. I'd love for you to get in touch with me about that because, and generally Catholics do a whole lot better with this than Protestants. And we need to change that. We all need to do well with this.
I just wondered, is abortion, I'm Jeff Cannon, is abortion on the rise, or, are we seeing more abortions than we normally have, or I'm not even sure how to frame that question, but.
Okay, I think that's a really good question too. If you look at statistics, and I don't believe states are providing the statistics that they used to. The most recent I can find are 2014. They say that abortion numbers are going down. Guttmacher Institute mainly. I don't believe it's true because with medical abortions, those can be prescribed, by just about any doctor, and there's, who knows? And the other thing is Plan B, the morning after pill.
Yeah.
Who knows how many are taking that, and you can just buy that in your grocery store. So, and they're not considering, they've changed how they see conception. So now, it used to be that conception began at fertilization. So immediately when the sperm meets the egg, there's the pregnancy. Now, they've changed the terminology or changed the definition of conception to implantation in the uterus. And so there can be about a week there while the embryo is traveling. And so that's another reason why they might say abortion numbers are down, because they don't consider it an abortion until it's implanted. Yes?
George Meyer Lakewood. Bruce is not here today, but a lot of you know that he goes to Planned Parenthood every Thursday, and 41st and Pontiac. I've gone over there several times, and remember one of the first times I was there, I went up to the fellow that kind of runs it, and I said, what do you get out of being here? He said, when a young lady drives in, takes our literature, drives over and parks, and reads it and drives out, that overwhelmed me. But to see that, that's a really neat spot, and the people go there every week are so dedicated, just really touching to go there and see that. And if you've not done that, get with Bruce and go. I mean, it's just overwhelming. It really is.
Does he go with,
You gotta stand up.
I'm sorry. I knew a lady named Wendy Faustin, and she was arrested a few times. And so she's an activist. If anybody wants to have her contact information, I can provide that too. That's it.
Dan Didster Barbata. In hearing you talk today, I had a paradigm shift in my own thinking, and that is that theft is a sin, and infidelity is a sin, and a variety of other things are sins, but they don't launch a lifetime obligation. And the fact that a pregnancy launches a lifetime obligation makes that sin unique in that we can't just say, well, you shouldn't have done that, or we'll put you through detox and send you on your way. You now have an obligation that's a lifetime. And if you're a member of a church body, the church body can recognize the sin, they can ask that you be contrite, but then they need to take care of that kid, because the kid didn't ask to be launched. So there's a lifetime of obligation to that particular sin that we need to be mindful of.
One thing that you didn't cover is that, of course, adoption is, probably the primary way out of the situation. But then it seems like there's another whole set of guilt that goes along with giving up your baby. Have you addressed that at all in your books or your...
Yes, I actually do talk about the adoption aspect in the A-Word book. And as much as I believe adoption can be wonderful and beautiful and does save lives and should always be offered as an option, what I've learned from people who work in the adoption business have told me that women who place their babies for adoption, even lovingly and willingly, have a lot of the same feelings of grief and loss as women who have aborted their babies. And so that needs to always be brought into the conversation. Adoption is a beautiful picture, but that picture of the adoptive parents and the baby doesn't tell the whole story. But it's still a life choice.
Yeah, it's another whole conversation.
Right.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Wait a minute.
Oh, wait, you didn't know
I've
that?
had my hand up for a while.
I hadn't forgotten you either. I knew you had something else to say.
He always does.
As unlikely it is for you to comment.
Yeah, Russ Haas here, a couple of different things. There are national organizations that have 800 numbers, which you can call into. Is Andy still here? No. CareNet, for instance, with a number of 877-791-5475, has 24-hour counseling available via the phone for somebody who's in distress. Jeff, you asked about abortions not, up or down. Surgical abortions are down, but we have no way of tracking chemical abortions. So that's a great unknown. Colorado Right to Life, for instance, also gives support and whatever. They're down Planned Parenthood 5 days a week. And if you want to talk about control, there are some of the folks from that organization who are forbidden by judges to go near an abortion facility. Ray mentioned the Catholic support group, but there are Lutherans for Life, for instance, many different organizations. So when in doubt, if you know somebody who's active in the pro-life movement, contact them, and that person probably can pass you on to a source which will give you support. In the way old days, in the 50s and 60s, there were a couple of different Catholic orders which provided housing for pregnant young ladies, something like Sisters of the Good Shepherd were doing it. There were non-Catholic organizations like Florence Crittenden and all, which I think is still in business. So, thank you.
Thank you, Russ. I think there are a lot of resources out there. But just because somebody's pro-life or a church is pro-life, it doesn't necessarily mean that they know how to reach out to people. And so I like that you pointed out they hopefully can direct women if they aren't aren't trained in addressing them directly. They can direct them to somebody who can do that graciously.
Anything else? Anybody else? Oh, Bill?
Well, Wagner again. I was just curious, do you know what children, what kind of help they get in public schools along these lines? What's do they just go to a school psychologist or a therapist, or what is that?
Are you talking about if they find themselves pregnant?
Yeah, or
Or had an
thinking about
abortion?
suicide or
Oh, right.
whatever.
I think that in most public schools, they're most likely to be taken to Planned Parenthood.
Free trip, huh?
Yeah, they don't get any information on abortion or the damage that it causes, unless maybe they're a Catholic school or a Protestant school that actually teaches that. But public schools, no, they don't know anything.
Yeah, Phil, when Laura Boggs' old son was in the local public high school, he went to the counseling office for some reason, and he saw gift certificates for Planned Parenthood on the table.
So,
Just right for Christmas.
Right, and you can get coupons online for discount on Plan B.
all right. Anybody? Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Russ, did you have a comment you wanted to make about what Ray said?
Oh, definitely.
Okay.
Do we want to do the decision on?
Well, I was just going to give you a chance to
Yeah.
say your piece, and then we'll go next to the mic.
Right, in the aftermath of World War II, a Jewish fellow went to Germany to interview people about how Germany got into that situation, and his results were a book, and they thought they were free. Are you free to travel in the United States today? No. You have to have government ID. You have to be groped by the TSA. If you want to leave the country, you have to get permission from the IRS. In this country, are we free to communicate? Well, all electronic communications are now monitored by the government. We have license plate readers throughout the land which can track any car, any place, any time, and create a record for them. We have facial recognition software. We have surveillance cameras. Your money in the bank account, if you have transactions over $10,000, you've got to report them to the federal government. If you have a number of transactions below the $10,000 limit, your bank account can be confiscated by the federal government. Vaccines, we're now seeing efforts to go to mandatory vaccines. A government that can put something into you can put anything that it wants into you. College admissions now being done on the basis of race. We have national databases. For instance, if you have a concealed carry permit in Colorado and you're driving a rental car through New Jersey, you could be pulled over because the New Jersey cops have access to concealed carry data nationwide.
That's why I never take my weapon to New Jersey.
Yeah. Watch out. You have Chuck Schumer's wonderful quote to President Trump that don't cross the national security establishment because they can get you 6 different ways.
From Sunday.
Yes. And right now, our government, if it doesn't like what you're doing, can put you in solitary confinement for a nonviolent offense. We have this one case of Martina Butkin-Tova or something like that. She came over here associated with got a degree from American College, associated with the National Rifle Association. They put her in 6 months in solitary confinement 6 months before the trial. Then she was tried for failure to register as a federal agent, and she was given 3 times the maximum sentence by the judge because she crossed the government. So we don't have a situation where somebody comes in like an invading army, where we have a stealth thing. Every asset of our life is now monitored by the federal government. Is that not a totalitarian state? We're well on the way. Thank you.
Thank you. George, do you want to? All right, guys. Do you want to go ahead and?
Hey Russ, it's not near as bad as you think it is. I just got approved for my college loan. That's kind of a flattering phone call I got. Did you get one of those? Did you get a college loan approval call?
No, but I get all sorts of communications about other loans and things like that.
Anyway, thank you so much. That reminds you that we appreciate you. There's an honorarium and $77 raised for you. I don't see you with a flag pin.
Oh, yes.
Next time we see you, you gotta have that.
Awesome, okay.
And then we have couple handouts. This one has a DVD in it. And this is written by Sean, who, when he's here, sits here a minister about the faith of our founding fathers. And several of us here subscribe to the New American. Do you? Are you aware of that?
I am not.
It's a phenomenal publication.
Okay.
And thank you so much.
Thank you.
Give her one more hand, okay?